A new home? A new beginning? That's what this was supposed to be. After years of grinding, saving, and pushing through long nights of work, I finally did it. I bought my dream home. Spacious, modern, in a quiet, upscale community. Everything was perfect until I met her. At first, moving in felt like stepping into a postcard. The houses were pristine, the streets lined with manicured trees, and neighbors waved as they walked their designer-breed dogs. It was everything I had envisioned for my fresh start. But perfection has a price, and in my case, that price came, wrapped in passive-aggressive notes and HOA bureaucracy. The first sign of trouble arrived the very next morning. A stark white envelope was taped to my door, its presence so ominous that it felt like a court summons. Confused, I ripped it open. "Dear resident, it has come to our attention that your residence is in violation of several community guidelines. Please remove all non-conforming furniture from your front porch and ensure all visible belongings meet aesthetic standards. Failure to comply will result in further action. Sincerely, the HOA Board." I frowned. What non-conforming furniture? I had barely unpacked. I stepped outside to investigate. And then I saw her. Across the street, standing with her arms crossed like a self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, was Karen. I didn't need to be told. She was the kind of person you could spot from a mile away. Her perfectly styled bob, her pressed beige pants, the expression of barely contained disdain. She was the queen bee of whatever suburban monarchy she thought she ruled over. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. "Good morning, neighbor," I called. Waving, she did not wave back. Instead, she strode across my lawn like she owned it, eyes locked onto the criminal contraband in question, my single modern outdoor chair. "You need to remove that," she announced, as if my furniture choice personally offended her. I blinked. Why?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "It doesn't match community standards." I turned, looking at the chair. Sleek, neutral color. Matched my house. "You're joking," I said. She wasn't. "And while we're at it," she continued, her nose tilting upward, "we weren't informed of a new tenant. Did the previous owner get this purchase approved by the HOA? That's when it hit me. Karen didn't think I was a homeowner. She thought I was a renter. And that's when I decided to play along. I wasn't sure if Karen had a sixth sense for detecting people who didn't fit her personal vision of the neighborhood, or if she had been watching my every move from the moment I arrived. Either way, she had already made up her mind. I didn't belong, and in Karen's world, that was a problem. I decided to lean into her assumption. "Oh, I don't think the owner needed to check in with you," I said casually, watching her eyes light up with what could only be described as predatory delight. "Oh, but they do," she responded, her smile widening like a shark scenting blood in the water. "See, we have strict policies about who can live here. If the homeowner didn't get this approved, then I'm afraid we'll have to start the eviction process." She said it so smugly, so matter-of-factly, that I almost laughed out loud. "Eviction? From my own house?" "Oh no," I said, feigning concern. "That sounds serious." Karen folded her arms, reveling in her imagined power. "It is. The HOA has the right to protect the integrity of our community. That's when I decided it was time to drop the bomb. I pulled my house keys from my pocket and twirled them around my finger. "Well, that's great to hear, Karen," I said, grinning. "Because I'm not a renter. I'm the new owner." The effect was instantaneous. Karen's confident smirk shattered. Her eyes flicked between my face and the keys, as if trying to process the sheer impossibility of what I had just said. You bought this house?" she stammered, voice cracking. "Yep, paid in full, signed, sealed, delivered." For the first time since I met her, Karen was at a loss for words. Her jaw opened, then snapped shut. The gears in her head were grinding, so hard I thought I could hear them screeching. Then, as if she hadn't just tried to threaten me with eviction, she plastered on the fakest smile I'd ever seen. "Well," she said, her voice suddenly drenched in artificial sweetness. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm the president of the HOA, so if you need anything, you can come to me." I nodded. "Good to know." Then I turned and shut the door in her face. I hoped, that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The very next day I woke up to another HOA violation notice taped to my door. Then another. And another. Karen might not have been able to evict me, but she was determined to make my life a living nightmare. First, she complained about my porch light. Then, my trash bins being visible from the street, even though they were placed exactly where the HOA guidelines said they should be. Then, the fact that my car was parked in my own driveway. Karen was on a warpath. But what she didn't know had a secret. Because I didn't just own this house. I owned several houses. In fact, I owned a third of the entire neighborhood. And Karen? She was about to learn exactly how much power I really had. Karen was relentless. If she couldn't get rid of me, she was going to make sure I regretted moving in. The first HOA notice was laughable. The second was annoying. The third, that's when I realized this was war. Each morning I found a new violation taped to my front door. My porch light was the wrong shade of white. My trash bins were out of compliance, even though they were in the exact same place as everyone else's. My car was parked incorrectly. In my own driveway, Karen was pulling violations out of thin air, and she knew it. The worst part, she wasn't alone. Karen had a small army of HOA board members, some who genuinely believed in her nonsense, and others who were just too tired to argue with her. I knew if I didn't act fast, she would bully me into submission like she had probably done to countless others before me. But what she didn't know, I wasn't just some random new homeowner. I was her worst nightmare. The final straw came when I received a formal complaint from the HOA demanding that I appear before the board for a hearing. Apparently, my front yard was neglected and violating neighborhood standards. This was hilarious, considering I'd lived there for less than a week, and my lawn was perfectly manicured. I held the letter in my hand, shaking my head, when Mark, my next-door neighbor, walked over, coffee in hand. "You really pissed off Queen Karen," he chuckled, nodding at the letter. "She's been running around all morning talking to the other board members. She's out for blood." I sighed. "Figures. She tried to evict me before realizing I actually own the house. Now she's just doubling down." Mark took a sip of his coffee, grinning. "Oh, it gets better. She doesn't know you own more than just this place, does she?" I smirked. "Not yet." That afternoon, I walked into the HOA office, fully expecting a circus. And I was right. Karen was already seated at a long wooden conference table, a thick folder of paperwork spread out in front of her. The other board members sat beside her, looking equal parts tired and amused. Greg, the HOA vice president, barely glanced up as I sat down. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered, clearly sick of Karen's antics. Karen sat up straight, flipping through her paperwork like a lawyer about to nail a guilty verdict. "As you all can see," she began, dramatically gesturing to her documents, "this homeowner has repeatedly violated our community standards." She slid a series of photos across the table. One showed a single blade of grass in my lawn that was slightly taller than the others. Another captured my trash bins on pickup day, literally at the curb where they were supposed to be, and the last one, a single Amazon package on my porch. I burst out laughing. "You've got to be kidding me." Karen's face turned red. "This is a serious matter. We cannot allow homeowners to lower property values by disregarding the rules." Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. "Karen, do you have actual evidence of these violations?" Karen pointed at the ridiculous photos. "I have proof." I shook my head. "Karen, this isn't proof. This is insanity." That's when I decided to turn the tables. I pulled out my own folder and slid it across the table. "Actually, Karen, I think we need to discuss your violations." Karen stiffened. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. I did some digging. "Turns out, as the self-proclaimed enforcer of HOA rules, you've been breaking quite a few yourself." I flipped to the first document. For example, The community guidelines clearly state that trash cans cannot be left outside for more than 6 hours after pickup. Yet, here's a photo of your bins still out the next morning. Karen's face paled. That's irrelevant. Oh, there's more, I continued, flipping the page. Guideline 14B states that all vehicles must be parked in designated driveways or garages. But here's a picture of your car parked on the street repeatedly. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and then I went for the kill shot. And let's not forget the fact that you built an unapproved extension on your backyard patio. No permits, no approval from the board. That's a major violation. Greg looked at the evidence, then turned to Karen. Is this true? Karen swallowed hard. That's different. Greg sighed and closed my folder. Karen, we've had enough of this nonsense. You can't harass homeowners for non-existent violations while you're breaking half the rules yourself. Karen's entire body went rigid. But, case dismissed, Greg announced, standing up. Then he turned to Karen. And Karen, you might want to get your own violations sorted out immediately. I smirked as I walked out. Karen was shaking with rage, her entire world crumbling around her. But I knew one thing for certain. This war was far from over. You'd think getting publicly humiliated in front of the HOA board would make Karen back off. But if there was one thing I'd learned about Karen, it was this. She didn't know how to lose. For a few days, everything was eerily quiet. No new violation notices. No Karen lurking in her yard, arms crossed, watching my every move. Mark even joked, "Dude, you might want to check if she's building a secret bunker to plot your downfall." We laughed, but deep down, I knew he wasn't far off. Karen's silence wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. And then it happened. A thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. I expected another bogus violation, but when I opened it, I nearly burst out laughing. Because this time, Karen had gone nuclear. It was an eviction notice. The letter, stamped with the official HOA logo, read, "Dear homeowner, due to persistent community disruptions and failure to comply with homeowner standards, the HOA has made the decision to revoke your residency. You are hereby required to vacate the premises within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in further action. Sincerely, the HOA board." I stood there staring at it. Then I actually laughed out loud. She really thought she could kick me out of my own house. Mark walked over just as I was holding up the letter. "No way," he said, snatching it from my hand. "She actually did it?" "Oh, she did it," I said, shaking my head. "She went nuclear." Mark read the letter, his eyes widening. "Dude, she doesn't even have the power to evict you. The HOA doesn't own the property. They can fine you, harass you, but they can't just kick you out." I grinned. She's about to find that out the hard way. Instead of reacting immediately, I did something Karen never expected. I waited. I wanted her to think she had won. Sure enough, the next morning, Karen was glowing. She strutted around the neighborhood, smiling, waving to people, acting like she had restored order to her perfect little kingdom. She probably thought I was already packing my bags. That's when I decided it was time to let her know exactly who she was messing with. I called an emergency HOA meeting. Not as a resident under attack, but as a property owner with power. When I arrived at the meeting, Karen was already seated at the conference table, smug beyond belief. She barely contained her glee as she said, "I'm surprised you even showed up. We assumed you'd be packing by now." I set a thick stack of legal documents on the table and leaned forward. "Actually, Karen," I said, "I came to discuss something important. The future of this community." She scoffed. "There's nothing to discuss. The board already made their decision. You have 30 days to vacate." I chuckled. "Yeah, about that." I slid a document across the table. "You see, you don't have the authority to evict me. In fact, this eviction notice you sent me, it's completely fraudulent." Karen's smile froze. "You didn't file it properly," I continued. "It wasn't reviewed legally. You bypassed the actual process. This isn't just an invalid eviction. It's HOA fraud. I tapped the paper. This is a cease and desist order from my lawyer. If you don't retract your fake eviction, you're looking at a lawsuit. Karen's face went pale. This is nonsense. Oh, and one more thing, I said, pulling out another document. I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but since she tried to remove me from my own home, I thought I'd clarify something important. I smiled. You do know I own multiple properties here, right? Karen's jaw clenched. You what? I nodded. That's right, I own 10 houses in this neighborhood. I leaned back. That means I have a say in what happens here. In fact, according to HOA bylaws, since I own more than 10% of the properties, I have voting power that surpasses even yours. The room fell dead silent. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. That's ridiculous. You, Greg, the HOA vice president, cut her off. Karen, is this true? I pulled out one final document. And actually, I'd like to make a motion, I said, smiling. Effective immediately, I'd like to propose a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president. Karen's eyes went wide. You can't. Greg cleared his throat. Actually, he can. Karen realized. At that moment, she had played herself. The board took a vote right then and there. Karen, officially removed as HOA president. She tried to argue, yell, even threaten legal action, but the board was done with her. The neighborhood was done with her. And within a week, a new reasonable HOA president was elected. As for Karen, she put her house up for sale the next day. The morning her for sale sign went up, Mark texted me a picture with a single word. Victory. And just like that, the neighborhood was finally free. Karen was gone. Her for sale sign stood tall in her front yard, a monument to her downfall. For the first time since moving in, I could step outside without worrying about some petty violation notice being taped to my door. The neighborhood felt lighter. People walked their dogs without fear of Karen scolding them for using the wrong brand of leash. Kids rode their bikes freely, no longer at risk of a Karen-induced traffic stop for exceeding acceptable speed limits. Even Greg, the former HOA vice president, looked 10 years younger. But Karen's downfall wasn't just about me. It was about everyone she had bullied. And as the dust settled, I realized something. I hadn't just won a battle. I had changed the entire neighborhood. A few days after Karen's departure, the HOA held a town hall meeting. The new HOA president, Linda, a Zuishi, no-nonsense woman with actual common sense, called the meeting to discuss some adjustments to the HOA's rules. We've received numerous complaints, she said, about excessive enforcement of minor infractions over the past few years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A retired couple near the front nodded vigorously. A young mom in the back rolled her eyes. Mark? He just smirked at me. Linda continued. It's clear that many of our previous policies were, let's say, misused. A few people actually laughed. Linda smiled. So, we're making some changes. One by one, they rolled back the absurd rules Karen had forced into place. Trash bins? As long as they were put away within a reasonable time, no one cared. Porch furniture? As long as it wasn't falling apart or a health hazard, it was fine. Street parking? Allowed, as long as it wasn't blocking driveways. It was common sense. Something Karen never had. A week after the meeting, Mark sent me a final gift. A video. Apparently on the day Karen moved out, she had one last meltdown. The new HOA board had denied her request for an exemption on her own property violations. That meant she had to fix her unapproved patio extension before selling her house. And let's just say, she didn't take it well. The video showed her screaming at contractors, waving her arms wildly, red-faced and furious. At one point, she tripped over a garden hose and fell into the dirt. Mark, ever the documentarian, zoomed in. Poetic justice. He texted with the video. I watched it twice, then saved it, just in case I ever needed a reminder of what victory looked like. Looking back, this wasn't just about one power-hungry Karen. It was about a bigger problem, people who abuse whatever tiny bit of authority they have. Karen thought she could bend the rules to her liking. She thought she could bully me out of my own home. She thought she was untouchable. But she forgot one thing. Knowledge is power. I knew my rights. I knew the rules better than she did. And when she tried to play her power games, I played them better. A month after Karen left, the for sale sign vanished. A young couple moved in. No one taped a violation notice to their door. No one stalked them from across the street. And most importantly, no one tried to evict them from their own home. The neighborhood was finally what it was supposed to be. Peaceful, friendly, Karen-free. Karen was gone. Her reign of terror was officially history, and the neighborhood was finally breathing again. No more petty violation notices. No more Karen lurking around, searching for imaginary rule breakers. No more whispered conversations about how to avoid her wrath. For the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood felt like home. But the real surprise? The people Karen had been keeping quiet. Without Karen's iron grip on the HOA, the neighborhood changed almost overnight. Neighbors who had once avoided each other out of fear of HOA enforcement started talking again. People actually hung out, outside, hosting small get-togethers on their porches, something Karen would have called a disturbance to community harmony. One morning, I stepped outside to see a group of dads setting up a basketball hoop at the end of the cul-de-sac. Before Karen, this would have triggered a full-scale investigation into whether the hoop was HOA approved. Now, nobody cared. Kids laughed as they dribbled basketballs in the driveway, free from Karen's ridiculous "no playing in public spaces" rule. It was like the whole place woke up after being frozen in Karen's dictatorship for years. The new HOA president, Linda, wasted no time cleaning up Karen's mess. Karen's excessive fines? Refunded. The Karen-era policies? Rewritten. HOA enforcement? Limited to actual real violations, not just whatever irritated the HOA president.
That day, one afternoon, Linda knocked on my door. "I just wanted to say thanks," she said.
You probably don't realize this, but what you did, it changed everything. I shrugged. I just wanted to live in peace. Linda laughed. Well, you gave the rest of us that too. Turns out I wasn't the only one Karen had harassed. She had bullied dozens of families. Older couples who got fined for having garden gnomes in their yard. Single moms who got letters shaming them for having too many deliveries. Veterans who were threatened with fines for flying American flags that weren't the exact approved dimensions. Everyone had a Karen horror story. But now, those stories were just stories. Karen wasn't here anymore, and her legacy completely erased. A few weeks later, Mark and I were sitting on my porch, beers in hand, watching the neighborhood return to life. "You ever think she's going to try and come back?" he asked, smirking. I snorted. No way. She knows better. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat, but she was smart enough to know when she'd lost, and after getting kicked out of her own throne, she wasn't about to come back and relive the embarrassment. Mark raised his bottle. To a Karen-free neighborhood. I clinked mine against his, to never letting another HOA dictator take over again. We drank to that. One afternoon, as I was relaxing on my porch, I saw the new family moving into Karen's old house, a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. I smiled. They had no idea what this neighborhood had been through, and honestly, that's exactly how it should be. Karen was gone. Her era of terror was over, and the neighborhood? Finally, at peace. One evening, as I was kicking back on my porch with Mark, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the HOA board. I nearly spit out my drink. "She did what?" I said, waving my phone at Mark. Mark read the email, then burst out laughing. "Oh my God, she actually tried to come back." Apparently, after Karen's eviction stunt failed and she got booted from the HOA, she decided to lawyer up and try to reverse her removal. Her argument? That her leadership was essential to maintaining the neighborhood's quality. that the new HOA board was unqualified, that removing her had been a personal attack, not a legitimate decision. Classic Karen. But here's the funny part. Not only did the HOA reject her appeal immediately, but her own legal threats backfired. Instead of taking her seriously, the HOA used the situation as an opportunity to strengthen their rules against power-hungry board members. In other words, Karen didn't just lose again. She made it impossible for another Karen to ever take over again. A few days later, Linda, the new HOA president, stopped by my house. "Thought you'd like to know," she said, smiling. Karen finally backed down. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What happened?" Linda chuckled. "Well, after we rejected her appeal, she tried to rally support from other homeowners. She emailed, called, even sent letters trying to convince people to sign a petition for her. Return." I blinked. "No way." "Oh yes," Linda said, "except no one signed. Not a single person." I laughed. Even Karen's former allies had abandoned her. She had spent years lording over the neighborhood, treating people like subjects instead of neighbors, and in the end, she had no one left on her side. Karen had officially lost everything. After weeks of denial, Karen was finally moving on for good. Sometimes, people in positions of perceived power try to bully others. But remember, knowledge is power, too. Knowing your rights, understanding the rules, and standing up for yourself can make all the difference. And sometimes, a little unexpected ownership can turn the tables in ways they never saw coming. Don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, no matter how powerful they think they are, and that's the full saga. What did you think? Have you ever had to deal with a Karen in your neighborhood, at work, or anywhere else? Drop your Karen stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more wild HOA stories. See you in the next one.